Sorry, man. Sorry about that.
Yes, my apologies. Where is he so I can spotlight his video?
There he is with the.
Hey guys, how's it going?
Hey, Chance.
Hi,
I like
there
your
he is.
background, man.
Thank you. I've
Nice.
had this for 2 months. It's my official lockdown background.
There we are.
Gonna get a
Thank you
few
very
lockdown
much.
beards in here. That's good.
Oh yeah, I just shaved mine. I was just telling them mine was looking like Steven's up there for a little while,
Well, you will
and
know
it was getting very gray too. I'm like, oh,
you can only dream to have Brian's beard, Chad.
oh, I wish. That is the best.
That's true, Brian's beard. Well, I took care of my beard yesterday. So, hi, I'm Rebecca Jones, and I just want to welcome everybody to our Nexter chat. Nexters are those who want to move us and are moving us from to next from now. And it's our privilege today to welcome back Chad Mairn. I just said that I'm a stalker of Chad's. I've been following him for years. And Chad has brought Chance Glasgo. But I just want to introduce Chad first. The reason I've been following him for years is because he started out as really a baby librarian, speaking at a conference, and I could tell he was just so into different technologies that nobody was using. And he has developed into quite the emerging technologies guru, if you like. And he's innovation lab manager at St. Petersburg College. He's also somebody I rely on to recommend great music because he's in 3 bands and good beer. If I could just get him started on scotch, we'd be fine.
Yeah, no scotch for me anymore. No.
So Chad, take it away.
All right. Well, thanks, and thanks for everybody for coming in. Appreciate it. So yeah, today we're just gonna have a conversation. Feel free to jump in anytime with questions. I've got a few kind of already set up and ready to go. But so I just want to say, like, Chance and I met a couple years ago, I think now. He came into my school at St. Petersburg College, and I had no idea. My IT people were like, hey, you got to come check out this thing. And I had no idea what it was. And so he broke out, I think it was an Oculus Go at the time, and then showed me what this VR collaborative app called rumii, which we'll talk about today. And I was just like blown away by it and saw potential for, especially for education way back then. And of course now with the COVID-19 and we're all working from home and we're all looking at like the screen right now and it's not really engaging. I mean, it can be, but when you're actually inside VR, interacting with people and seeing, you know, interacting with 3D objects too and all this stuff, it's so much more engaging, and you can enhance education too. So so those of you that don't know, Chance is one of the founding members of Infinity Ward, which I think you released about 7 titles, helped release 7 titles.
6, I think, when I was there.
6? Okay.
Yeah.
Of the very popular Call of Duty. And this is something pretty interesting. I was cleaning out my office the other day. I don't think you were on this one or worked on this one, but I don't know if you can, it looks like it's backwards. Anyway, I found this while cleaning the other day for PlayStation 3. I don't know if you can see.
Which Call of Duty is it? Oh, it's Black Ops.
Black
That was
Ops.
a Treyarch game.
Yeah. So anyway, PlayStation 3. So anyway, so I was reading an article where it said that you had, quote, game industry burnout, and then you actually moved to Brazil to figure out what your next steps were. So can you tell us a little bit about that? And I've got the presentation up, so if you want me to drive.
Yeah, so you can go ahead and start. Might as well start with that first video of my street in Brazil. This is where I was when I started Doghead Simulations with our 2 co-founders. So this is basically Rio de Janeiro, Gloria. It's in Rio, but it's about maybe a 10, 15-minute train ride from the beach area that if you were to be a tourist and go there, you probably wouldn't come there. It was awesome because basically, there wasn't hardly anyone that could speak English on the street just because of where it was. And it forced me to hang with the locals, drink their beer, and learn Portuguese from them, as you could see. So I learned most of my Portuguese by buying, 600 milliliter beer bottles for old men and just try to communicate to them as they slowly taught me how to speak.
Nice.
Yeah, so it was just burnout. I worked on, I think it was like 100. I worked on over 100 different weapons on Call of Duty, and I was doing the first-person weapons animation, yeah, it was just kind of like pulling a Dave Chappelle, as I call it. You just want to you did something pretty successful for a while, and you're just like, I want to go do something completely different.
Right,
So
right.
yeah, I was recovering from the game industry.
Gotcha. So who did you meet in Brazil, and then how did that kind of start Rumii or Doghead Simulations?
Actually, when I was in Brazil, I went to Gamescom in Germany, Cologne, Germany, which is basically the E3 of Europe. And I met with another Full Sail Hall of Famer, Albert Perez. And I would usually see him every year because we'd come back to Full Sail and do talks for the students. And he was working in at HTC. He was worked on the HTC Vive before he's even out, one of the early people in VR. And he wanted out. And I was kind of looking for my next thing, and I wanted to work in VR. And so we were actually at a French bar in Cologne talking about like what we could teach in VR, like what could we create, train people, you know? And
Yeah.
we came with ideas. We're at a bar. We're like, what about bartending? You can teach them how to bartend in VR. You know, grab the glasses, move them, pour. You know, you could
Nice. Yeah.
add like bonuses for pouring perfectly, all these things. And then it kind of throughout the night, it evolved from bartender training to bear tender, where you're a bear bartender and you're just slowly getting animals wasted. And as they just become more ridiculous, you have to like manage them, make sure they
Oh.
don't get violent with other patrons. And that didn't really work out, mostly because if you're like, go to, say investors and say, hey, I've got this idea that will completely revolutionize the way we communicate, do education and distance learning, and especially times right now, right? Versus, hey, you want to get a goat drunk with a chinchilla? Give me $1 million, you know? So
Hey, if
imagine
I had,
raising money.
yeah.
I know if you had the money, you would be all about, as long as I'm
Totally.
drinking scotch.
Oh,
Yeah.
nice. So, traditionally, I think, VR is isolation. You're kind of in your own little world, and that's cool. I love that about it. But with stuff like Rumii, that whole social VR concept is awesome. And I don't know how many of you have actually been in Rumii or something similar. If you want to just raise your hand if you've actually done it before, so we can kind of get an idea. But I just think it's pretty mind blowing. I really do. So when can
You
you?
can go to the next slide. I actually put these out of order. I guess it would have made sense to mention this next slide when we're
All right,
talking
hang on.
about
Let's
what
do
I was
that.
doing before I quit.
Oh, there we
Yeah,
go.
so you played any of these games. The bottom right is the companies I work for. And these are the AAA games I worked on. It does not include the dentist who took over Compton, unfortunately, because it was a 90s text adventure that only sold a few copies. But I don't know what happened to the dentist who took over Compton. That's okay. Made some
Yeah.
games people played.
I wonder if that's like on the Internet Archive anywhere or
I
anywhere
hope
we
so.
can.
It's on some bulletin board system
Yeah.
in like Melbourne, Florida, probably.
Nice. Nice. Hey, do we have to look at the chat box thing too? Is there something going on,
Oh,
or
let's see. Maybe
Rebecca,
there's
are
some
you?
questions. Yeah, we can take questions mid. I don't
Yeah.
care.
Okay.
You just have anything, just throw it up. Make it
Yeah.
casual.
Just let us know for sure. Um, so this whole social VR thing, and now that I don't know what you're
Wait,
talking
one
about.
more slide before we get social VR. I'm looking
Gotcha.
at mine.
There we go.
Oh, there. Yeah, this is Infinity Ward. About a year into it, we were still in Oklahoma, but we photoshopped Los Angeles in the background because that's where we were about to move to. You
Nice.
can see me if you look at the very bottom right, three over
Oh
from the
yeah.
right, kind of with the Bieber haircut next to the guy with
Nice.
the long hair. So the three of us, me, the long hair guy, and the guy in the red next to him, we were basically the whole animation team.
Okay.
Now the animation team is probably like 20 people or something. So
I see. What's up with the guy with next to you with the black shirt on with the face?
oh, Brad, he's just being Brad. Brad is actually he's a blind artist. He's legally
Oh
blind and
yeah.
he's an amazing artist. He only has vision from the peripheral of his eyes, so he has to
Oh,
actually kind
interesting.
of look down or look up to kind of see straight.
Oh wow.
But he's been around since Medal of Honor Allied Assault. Really good dude.
That's
Known him
awesome.
since like 2000. So
Nice. That's cool. So okay. So is this the slide we should be on, you think?
yeah. I mean, this gets into social VR and kind of what it is, what it does. So go ahead and pick up where you were.
Yeah, so I'm just if you maybe just explain to everybody out there what Rumii is and how you think it can revolutionize collaboration and more importantly,
Yeah.
education.
Well, there's a lot of, issues with video conferencing that most of you guys have experienced. The biggest thing, the most obvious thing is you don't feel like you're there compared to a real life, right? You don't feel like you're present. VR has gotten to a point where it's gotten so good that our subconscious buys into the experience. The frame rate's high enough, the resolution's high enough, the response time's high enough. Our subconscious says, okay, I'm here. Our conscious brain says, I put a thing on my head and I'm in the matrix. But these two parts of the brain are kind of fighting with each other. What's cool is, with it getting so, for it getting to the point where our brain it's receiving information it expects, you have the sense of being present in a location. And so when you actually network other people in the same experience, especially if they're also in VR, you even feel present with those people. So not only do you feel present in an environment, you can feel present in an environment with other people. And that's really what we're missing from this experience right here, right? Right now I'm looking at 5 boxes. There's, I think, only 2 people here that I've Chad and Rebecca that I know, and so when someone talks, I'm like looking, and it might be one of the 20 people that I'm not looking at. They don't have video boxes, so I don't know who's talking, right? In VR, you naturally kind of group into a semicircle or a circle, just like you would in real life. And when someone talks, if they're to the left of me, I hear them out of my left ear. I just turn my head, and there they are with body language, with their mouth avatar moving. And I instantly can see who was talking. Something really simple that we take for granted in real life, right? But we have Facebook did a study. Facebook owns Oculus, and they found out that the cognitive effort that is put forth in VR conferencing is actually the exact same cognitive effort in a real life conversation. So it wasn't any easier. It matched, right? So that's pretty important. And if you go to the next slide.
Okay.
So in the study, there's a quote from that. This is a pretty subtle way to get to know somebody. There's not all this light shining on you. And the study found out that introverts were actually more extrovert than extroverts while in virtual reality. Now, it was a study of 60 people, so I think if we did a larger sample size, we'd find out that it wouldn't be introverts or more extrovert. We'd find out that it actually neutralizes the 2 groups kind of to a similar spot. But this is a really great for anyone that has social anxiety disorder, anyone that has high functioning autism or Asperger's. You talk to anybody with any of these situations that's done social VR, and they'll tell you the comfort level of just being able to be in an environment where you can socialize with people, but you're not physically there, and you can escape out of that scene just by taking your headset off, right? And so it's interesting, like even if you're none of those, and maybe you just want to improve your social skills, maybe you just spend a lot of time, at home growing up on the internet, like some of us nerds, right? You can do that there. It's just a good way to talk to people from different places and cultures, and just kind of, practice that part of your brain. So
yeah, like I've been in meetings in rumii before, and then like the meeting ends, it's done, time is over, and you still hang out with people, and you're still in there chatting. And it's the, like you mentioned, like the body movement, it's just like you're there. So and I think you mentioned not here, but on one of your posts, that rumii is free right now.
Yeah, it's been free since basically since the official lockdown. A little bit before that, it's been probably close to a couple of months. 2 months have been free. Yeah, so free, unlimited, up to 40 users per room, as many rooms as you want. We're going non-free probably like the second week of next month. So we are kind of eventually have to phase out of that because that's unsustainable. From a financial standpoint. But yeah, just to kind of get the word out there, and I think we've seen, like, at our peak, we saw about a 5 or 6x increase in traffic.
That's great.
Yeah.
Speaking of traffic, is rumii encrypted? I don't know if that. I mean, I guess that would.
Yeah. We have full 256-bit encryption through Amazon Web Services, because we use AWS for our cloud services, and so that's, if you want to dig into the encryption and all that, you'd have to just basically go on the AWS website and see everything they're doing.
Okay.
But we have while we're not on private networks, you can't install us on like an internal network. We are trusted by the DIA, Department of Intelligence Agency, in Booz Allen Hamilton use us for the non-classified. They're not talking about aliens and stuff in our software, but maybe if we add some more security, they will, and we can spy on them and find out about aliens.
See, that'd be cool.
Just kidding, NSA or Booz Allen, since you're the same. So,
Yeah. So that's free. So anybody
yeah.
really, if you really want to try it, I think now would be a time to hop in. Now you don't have to have a VR headset, although it's a lot more engaging and cooler that way. But if you at least want to try it, I mean, it works on smartphones, it works on Mac and PC.
Skip ahead 4. If you go 4 slides ahead, we can see the trailer and they'll go back.
Okay. Right here, right?
Yeah.
There it is. Here we go. I don't know if you guys are able to hear that or not.
No, you have your audio off. I think it's a checkbox somewhere. But it's just music.
It's just music, okay.
It's just like royalty-free music. So
Gotcha.
if you heard like a generic Apple commercial, that's what it sounds like.
So this looks like a classroom setting,
Which is the way that you use it, correct, Chad?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like to bring in a lot of 3D content where you can, instead of, me showing you something here, we can actually interact.
Yeah, right here you can see this engine is an FBX model. So if you're an engineer or something, you could take it in and so you see the hands and the heads moving. That's being driven by the actual VR hardware they're wearing. So you're getting body language in real time. A lot of people are like, why do you have these just floating torsos? Well, we don't have information about what your hips and what your legs and your feet are doing. And so if we had the rest of your body, it would just be like this stiff lower body that just kind of shifts around, and that would be extra creepy. So we go full stylized.
But yeah, so if you guys ever want to try it and get in that space, and just let us know.
If you stop on, you don't have to, but if you stop on one of the frames where he's like pointing at those cards on the board, like the Kanban setup, that was a fake Agile meeting about making VR headsets for dogs, since a lot of people ask us if Doghead Simulations does dog headsets.
Oh, nice.
So it's like a little bit after this. I think it's after this video right here. Nope, sorry. Almost. Right there. Pause. There we go. Chihuahua has too much neck strain, too much light leaking on English bulldogs.
That's perfect.
Good boy modes keeps crashing. Cocker Spaniels have issues with integrated audio.
That's perfect.
EDVR not working with bad dogs who don't sit.
That's awesome.
So little Easter egg. All right. If you go back a few frames or a few slides, we'll go back to where we were.
Right here, I think.
All right. Yeah. So if you think about humans, for the history of humankind, we've been communicating through this very complex exchange of body language, vocal intonation, eye movement, all these very complex things that come together. And when I'm having a conversation with a person in person, we're exchanging these, and based on what our face does, all the things that happen, we're getting shots of dopamine, serotonin, all these chemicals that make us happy, unhappy about the conversation and whatnot, right? So it's very complex exchange. And now we have, this is the former VP of Facebook saying the short-term dopamine-driven feedback loops that we've created are destroying how society works. No civil discourse, no cooperation, misinformation, mistruth. So we're just now getting studies of people who've grown up with social media their entire life. And they've studied people who've overconsumed it since, somewhere between age 5 and 10 up to their adulthood. And they're finding that there's a lot of people with depression, anxiety, a lot of psychological issues that happen because of the overconsumption of social media and not enough consumption of actual socializing, right? And if you think about, like I said, that we started this very complex exchange of information, and now we're to Facebook and Instagram that's dumbed down that response you give to people that's usually complex to just like. Not even like or dislike. We've gone something less than binary. I didn't know there was something less than binary, right? We've dumbed it down to just something that's either like or nothing. And our brains are being trained on that, we're getting just such a small amount of information, and our brains are getting used to having that this is it. That's the depth of this conversation, right?
And what's scary about that too is like a lot of times if you don't get that, you're like, what I do wrong?
Mm-hmm.
People don't like me anymore.
Yeah, like there's people that they'll post something and then immediately 3 hours later check to see how many likes they got, right?
Yeah.
And then if they didn't get much, they feel like what did I say? You know, did I do something
Mm-hmm.
wrong?
Yeah.
And maybe if you're, you know, exchanging that same information over a conversation, you would see that, okay, maybe they wouldn't say, I like what you said, but you look at their face and you could see that they liked it, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
So
So,
yeah, it's,
so Facebook, what do you think? I mean, they have this, I forget what it's called now, but I think they have a vision of people wearing VR headsets and actually interacting like you should be socially, but inside a social network like Facebook. I mean, is that what you
yeah.
think they're planning with the purchase of Oculus?
Yeah, I mean, they have Facebook Horizons.
That's it,
Yeah,
Horizons.
Horizons, yeah.
Yeah.
So that's going to be, you know, I'll be curious to see how productivity like based they go. Because one thing that's unique about rumii over, say, like Altspace or some of the
Mm-hmm.
others, we're definitely productivity based, and we're not about just meeting random people on the internet and VR. That's not what rumii does. You have to privately invite people to
Mm-hmm.
that, you know. But Verizon's is you know going to be the first attempt at like a Matrix or like at it's a Ready Player One term I'm looking for.
Oh, the Oasis.
Oasis, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's and then you have Second Life, which I think a lot of people here probably played with years ago, where it was more two-dimensional, and but libraries really dove into that space and actually did presentations, and they had like a
Yeah.
library system in there where people could come in and do research. So really, this is like the next obvious big step in. So way more engaging, of course, to be able to just walk around that
Someone
space.
asked, yeah, Second Life was an epic disaster. That's why I don't like people comparing it because it's really not that similar.
Yeah. Well, I'm
It's
just
just that there's like, it's what people think of though when you describe rumii.
yeah. Yeah, well,
Yeah.
I just wanted to mention that that's where libraries really kind of dove in with somebody correct or help me with my memory. What was the name of the library that was in there?
It was Library Island, wasn't it?
Library Island, yeah,
Yeah.
something like that.
So I know Brian plays good games because he thinks Second Life sucks. Like I felt like there was so little, like almost no crossover between gamers and people that played Second Life. And
Right.
that's no offense if anyone here played Second Life. It was just this weird like subgenre of a game that for some
Right.
reason just attracted people to use it that just didn't play other PC games at all. You know?
Right. Now, is there a VR version of Second Life coming or no? I don't know.
I mean,
And
I think any Second Life is going to have more of a purpose, you know. I mean, I didn't really get into it, so I can't really speak on Second Life much. But I do
Yeah.
have a story about, nothing bad about him, but I have a story about working for the guy who created Second Life. After he quit Second Life and he got into like performance art theater and stuff, right?
Mm.
And so I had a friend who ended up getting paid to shoot like this live theatrical event at the King in Hollywood, which is a pretty famous, like, you know, a lot of classic, you know, rock bands have come up and played there, one of those big Hollywood spots.
Yeah.
And so she hires me to do second camera. And so we're walking in, so I'm inside and I go out to get the camera equipment and I step outside and, you know, I'm just talking to, I forgot the guy's name, but the guy who started Second Life. And I was like, I'm going to go get the camera equipment. And I step outside and I see in the middle of the street, this dude in a wife beater with bandages on his wrist, just like wailing at this girl in the middle of the street. And I just see like 20 people standing around just like watching. And I'm like, oh, I guess they're filming something, because that's the reaction you have in LA when you see something crazy.
Yeah.
90+% of the time it's a movie being shot or something. And then I'm looking and I'm like, what's going on? And wait, there's no cameras. And then I realized that this dude is just beating up on this woman in the street and no one's doing anything. And I'm like, as soon as I realized that, I just started sprinting towards the guy. This big ass cholo guy, like 300 pounds, Lakers jersey, comes with me. I'm like, yeah. And this huge cholo guy is gonna kick his ass, right? And then we get like maybe 30 feet away. The guy stops and just lets me go. And I'm like 155 pounds, 6'2", didn't know any jiu-jitsu at the time. And I end up taking the guy down, right? And this is where it gets really funny. So I take the guy down. I'm waiting for the police. The police don't show up. And eventually I have to go because I've got a job. So I get up on the ground. And right when I leave, the Incredible Hulk from Hollywood Boulevard walks by the exact same spot. Like the Hulk, if you would have showed up, like literally a minute earlier, you would have had the Hulk smash a guy in the street, but it didn't happen.
Oh.
So side story about the Second Life guy.
That's perfect. Too bad it didn't get filmed though. That would have been even better.
Yeah.
Gosh.
Hollywood's crazy. Don't ever
Yeah.
live there.
Yeah, I have a friend that just moved to San Diego.
Oh, San Diego's awesome.
Yeah, it's beautiful. I just don't know how he's affording it, to be honest with you. But
Yeah.
you know, cool. So let me go to the next one here. Is there anything here you want to?
Yeah, it's kind of the reinforcement I said. In a face-to-face interaction, everything is qualitative. You use someone's gestures, facial expressions, that sort of thing to see how effective your message is. If you go online, one of the ways you gauge effectiveness is your message's number of likes, favorites, or tweets.
Oh yeah,
Same thing,
perfect. We already went through this.
Already.
Yeah, let's flip through this. We already did this one too, I think, right?
You skip. It's the same thing. Skip through.
Okay. So I think now we're at this
90s VR.
There we go. How would you describe VR back in the 80s or 90s versus what it is today?
Yeah, I think it was more like late 90s, late 80s, early 90s. It was crap. I mean, here we've got a few of them. We'll go through each one. This one looks like, did you see Judge Dredd? The movie Judge Dredd? With like Sylvester Stallone. It kind of looks like concept art or something like that.
It does.
It looks like some kind of future sci-fi 90s movie. So this, I don't know about this headset, but most of them had like a 60-degree field of view. It was like looking through toilet paper roll.
Yeah.
Frame rates were like 20 frames a second. They cost like $100,000. You can go to the next one.
Okay.
So this is like the United Nations and Apple got together and designed like a headset. And I don't know like why he's looking straight at his CRT monitor,
yeah. What is that?
It's opaque, man. You can't see through your screen.
I'm looking. It looks like he's got something in his mouth too. Does he or no?
That's the taste-o-vision.
It looks like a pacifier, like a weird pacifier.
You want to lick your environment.
Interact with your environment by licking.
Chad, can I just ask, as you're going through these, Chance, I'm interested in what you learned from these earlier renditions that you're now able to apply or avoid in using rumii for learning.
Well, I wouldn't say I really learned anything because I was like 10 years old at the time.
No, but I just
But you're saying like where has it come from
right.
then to now? Yeah. The biggest, obviously resolution, frame rate, response time, those are, and cost. Those are the four biggest differences, which is pretty much everything, right?
Yeah.
This one right here costed over $100,000. And this was one of the ones that were more successful. You could actually find these in arcades, and you'd probably have to pay like $5 to use it or something for a few minutes. But no one would want this in their house. Like who would want that big pod thing in their house? And over $100,000, it's just not going to, he's got like a weed whacker in his hand. So yes, basically the response time is like when I turn my head, how much of a delay is it between displaying what I'm expecting to see, right? So if I turn my head and there's a 15 millisecond delay like there is on this one, it's going to feel like it's a drunk simulator. Everything you do, it's like, oh, I'm playing a shooter, but I'm drunk. Oh, I'm gardening in VR, but I'm drunk,
Yeah.
So basically I had the recipe for everything that would make you sick. And even in modern VR, if you do make bad design decisions, you're going to potentially make someone sick. So it's usually not the hardware's fault anymore. It's usually a designer issue, or always at this point.
Well, it's funny. I always get this question, and I had this question yesterday, actually. People were like, well, what do you do, because you're in the library and you've got your VR stuff in there and people come in and use it. And I always get the question of, well, what do you do if someone gets sick or someone's going to get sick? I'm like, I tell them to take the headset off. What else do you do? There's nothing else I can do. So, but it's funny. I always get that question. And I always warn people too, hey, if you get motion sickness very easily, then you might not want to try this. But if you try it and you start feeling weird, take the headset off.
My favorite thing is, I'll talk to, like, I've never ever seen anybody get sick in rumii because we don't do anything that could potentially make you sick, right?
Right.
And so a lot of people will say that I try to demo, I've tried VR and I got sick. I'm like, really? What did you try? And they're like, I did a roller coaster on a Samsung Galaxy 6. Oh, you mean, so you did a roller coaster, which normally makes you sick, except now you're doing a roller coaster at like 25 frames a second.
Right.
Yeah, that'll make you really sick.
Oh, yeah.
So it's like, well, if something makes you sick in real life, it's going to make you sick in VR. It's not the VR's fault.
Yeah.
It's simulating what would happen in real life. So.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Let me hit the next one here. Oh, there's this one.
This is from a French, or no, it's from like a Japanese horror movie about a French man that actually sticks his head out of the toilet while you're using it.
What is the name of that?
I see. So I couldn't find much information, but I did find that this one had 120 degree field of view, which you'd expect that from having this toilet seat wrap around your face. But yeah, it's quite silly looking.
It is.
And this dog is having a good time, and he's in multiplayer because he's got a mic.
Oh, cool.
I don't know what headset that is. That's our prototype for Doghead simulations.
That's awesome. I love it. And then, this is okay. Yeah. So
you can play this. I'd skip the interview part, but I'd play most of the rest.
I mean, so this is what I'll do is I'll kind of talk just for a quick second, and maybe it'll be right there. But so when I saw, I think you shared this video of a couple weeks ago, but God, why can't I fast forward it now? But it's interesting to me. There's going to be no real limit now to what your eye sees geometrically. You know, normally it's like you can have all these polygons, and it's like, oh, I'm going to upload this to wherever, and it's like there's just too much. You can't handle it. But apparently with this, with Unreal Engine 5, it's like not a real issue anymore. I'm understanding. So let me fast forward to that part. I can't get rid of this thing here. Why is that thing not moving? Anyway, so I'm curious.
I think it's getting pretty close anyway.
Is it getting close?
I think so.
I'm curious, is like, are we going to be seeing this kind of thing in VR? Like this kind of detail, photorealism, you know, in VR?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that we're going to see that maybe like a generation after we see it in non-VR. Now, I mean, you could technically do that now in VR. So what I've heard is that you know, the PlayStation 5, its GPU architecture is similar to a GTX 2060, right? And if you guys know NVIDIA GPUs, they go like 60, 70, 80, and they're at 80 Ti, right? So it'd be like the 1060, which launched at like probably $250, $300, and then there was the 1070, the 1080. Now we're on the 20 series, and so the PlayStation 5 is actually using the entry-level version of this generation's cards, right? But why does it still look so amazing, right? Because if you play a 2060 game, you don't see any PC games that look quite this good that could run on a 2060. Well, what's great about the PlayStation 5, and what I'm assuming will happen with the new Xbox, is that you've got a dedicated SSD drive, right? So you don't have any moving parts.
Yeah.
And up until recently, up until these newer generation consoles, every console had a hard drive, a magnet, you know, a disk that would spin, right? So the hard drive output was a limitation. So now you have an SSD and connecting directly to the GPU, you can actually, you know, read and write fast enough to deal with this kind of stuff.
It's just amazing. I mean, if you just look at it and look at the detail, you know, I mean, there's like photorealism tours now of like Versailles and all these things where, you know, I think Google did it and they've got terabytes worth of data, and you can actually go in and inside VR and actually, you know, and see the reflection and all that of how it was captured, and it's amazing. But just to be able to play a game like this, or even interact in something like Rumii with this kind of graphic qualities is going to be insane.
Yeah. And if you see the like spotlight, right? All the other light that's on the spotlight is actually bounced light, and it's in real time.
It's amazing.
And so it's actually, you know, the only light source are these shafts of sun coming through. Everything else is just calculating how that light that comes through bounces off all the rocks. That's why it looks so realistic.
It's incredible.
So, you know, imagine this is basically what the next like Tomb Raider, you know, or Drake, will look like.
So maybe we are living in a simulation.
Well, I mean, yeah, that's something I was going to bring up. I mean, it's, you know, if I encourage everybody to look this video up, you know, because you're seeing it super compressed. You know, watch it in 4K on YouTube if you can. But this whole idea that, you know, simulation theory, it's not that crazy, you know, because look at how close we are now to visually being able to match real life, you know, like we're very close to having something that's visually indistinguishable from reality. Now, obviously, you know, it's gonna, you know, brain interfaces eventually will have to happen for us to have something that is indistinguishable from reality. Not that I'm saying I'm looking forward to it, but that's just kind of how technology will probably move. but yeah, at some point when we have really good VR, you know, that you don't necessarily notice that you're wearing and whatnot, that's, you know, it's going to be interesting to see what happens to society and humankind.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I mean, luckily we're already kind of slowly getting into it. I mean, you can go back to say World of Warcraft and say people have lived inside that game, even if it's not VR and looks like a cartoon, you know.
Right.
Um, so we're not going to see anything new. It's just going to be more realistic and look more like real life.
Yeah. I don't know where I read it, but you know, the Quest 2 is supposed to be 3K resolution per eye. Have you
Uh,
heard that?
Quest 2, 3K per eye.
Yeah.
I haven't heard that. No, that seems a bit of a leap compared to
Like, what
what
is
we
it
just
now? Do
had.
you know? Yeah.
It's like 3K in total,
Right.
or maybe 2.5K or something. It's like 2.5 to 3K in total. So that would be about a doubling.
Yeah.
Which I guess if they've got foveated rendering where it only renders what you're looking at, that could be
Mhm.
possible. And maybe there's something else they came up with. But really, I would rather see the current resolution and see them bump the frame rate to 90 frames from 72.
Yeah.
So, you know, like in that video they mentioned, probably didn't hear it, but, or actually you mentioned it, Chad. So we're hitting this point now where we have, you know,
Look at
if
that.
you calculate, I think 4K resolution is something like, let me see, how many pixels in 4K resolution? I think it's like 5 million or 8 million.
Wow.
Hold on, let me find out. It was 3840 times 2160.
While you're doing that, I keep looking at this video. I've seen it a bunch of times, but it just blows
Yeah.
my mind.
So we've got, let me see, it was yeah, so 8.3 million pixels on a
Mm.
4K image, right? Well, you have, you know, models that are 5K, or sorry, 5 million 5 million polygons themselves. So if you only have 8.3 million pixels on the screen,
Yeah.
why do you need to render that many polygons, or why do you need to render more polygons than that, right? Why don't you consolidate the 20 polygons that are taking up 1 pixel space and average that out and render that, right?
Right.
Um, and if we can probably go to the next slides, and I'll explain more of how this is happening. Nice screenshot. Yeah, more of this screenshot. All right, so here we have in games you have something called culling, and culling is what decides like what should be rendered, right? Um, you know, if you're facing to the west, you shouldn't be rendering everything to the east if you want a game that runs well, right? So one of the most old school versions of culling. And by the way, my background is animation. This is like the explain to me like I'm five version, because that's about the depth I understand of rendering. Um, so frustum culling is basically you've got that camera cone, right? Every single thing in that camera cone is being rendered. Everything, even the things behind the objects that are blocking, right? So those blocks in the front of the camera aren't actually keeping the blocks behind it from being rendered, even though you can't see them. So go to the next one. Now you have occlusion culling, which basically works with the cone, but now it figures out what you can't see, right? So you've got all these objects behind these first blocks you can't see. And the way that it does is it'll hide entire meshes, right? So even if you see like one polygon of a mesh sticking out, it's going to render that entire mesh, that entire
Yeah.
object. So it's better, but you know, objects in games are made up of many polygons, and if you could find a way to just hide some of them and not the entire object, you could basically have a more efficient way of rendering. So go to the next one. So you're basically, this is a polygon on the top, right? You've got an edge, which is connecting the vertices, the vertex, the points where the lines meet. And so now where the old culling would actually basically, if any sort of piece of this truck was exposed, we could see even like the very back end of the bed, it would still render that whole truck. Now what it does is it looks at what vertices, what points do I see? And if it doesn't see that point, it doesn't render that point, right? So now it might, instead of either 0% or 100% of rendering this object, now it might render just 5% of that object, 5% of which your eye can see, right? And because of that, you don't have all these basically wasted polygons that are stacked on top of each other that are rendering because they're part of the same object. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. It's wild. You guys have any questions about that?
Yeah, if you've ever played a game and you like look left and right, you see objects like pop in. That's usually because it's like really aggressive culling, to get a good frame rate. Just things just kind of appear. That's them calculating what you're looking at, but doing it so aggressively that you're actually seeing it pop in within your view.
Ah, um, so actually, when was it? A couple of weeks ago, I was actually interviewed by David Lankes, who is the director of the University of South Carolina's School of Information Science. And the first thing he mentioned to me, and I didn't even really think about this, how like VR, how you can store all these digital objects. So like, for example, if I walk into an anatomy and physiology class, I can see just shelves and shelves and shelves of all these 3D models. Well, with something like storing digital assets online, you can now have so much stuff stored online. But anyway, that was what we didn't get into. Then we started talking about the Gartner's hype cycle. And so I'm curious as to where you think VR is on this
Go to the next slide. Thinking about there.
Ah,
Yeah, I think the Quest might have been like the bottom of that.
yeah.
I think the Quest is kind of the turning point of like working its way into mainstream. Unfortunately, when we started Doghead, we were kind of like at the beginning, we were like on the opposite side of this curve. So like basically almost the bottom, but not quite. And so as a result, investment peaked at the peak of inflated expectations, and then it just drastically dropped off.
Yeah.
VR companies, so that definitely makes it tough. But yeah, with the Quest coming out, and you can't even find a Quest in stock. Steven has a question.
Yeah.
It's not so much a question, more of an idea. It'd be interesting to brainstorm how I think we've had a fundamental shift in the plateau where people are at technologically because of this 8-12 weeks, which is enough to change habits and behaviors.
Yep.
I think the hype curve is an interesting place to start on where people may be ready for certain shifts.
Mm-hmm.
I believe we're into a period of 3 years of isolation with less travel, less moving around. I think they're a perfect storm that may drive VR, AR in a different way.
Yeah,
and I'm thinking how where the social video games, like my cousins developed EverQuest for Sony,
and played EverQuest,
and that created the shift based on teen boys and girls in a hyperprotective parental population where they weren't allowed to go out as much.
Mm-hmm.
And
yeah,
so,
I mean, that's how a lot of people picked up a lot of their skills, whether it's programming or just being stuck inside, like in the 90s. I don't have unlimited access to the internet. I had like bulletin boards with a few files on it, but that's just kind of like, well, I got to do something. And some people paint, some people make games,
Right.
But you're right. Like you can't even, it's so hard to find a Quest in stock right now. Even Go's are a little bit harder to find these days. But I think that, this pandemic has definitely pushed us more towards that slope of enlightenment, I think.
I also think,
and what? Hold on.
I also think which is
Sorry.
more interesting to a certain degree, and Brian may have a comment on this. Sometimes we have technologies that are invented looking for a place to happen, and we apply technologies and they're solving a problem that doesn't exist. And then there are problems that do exist around learning and immersive education and the social aspects of locking down learning through conversations and questions.
Yeah.
And does the physical presence, the avatar, for lack of a better term, is that important or isn't it? Or how do we be in a room and how do we support some of this? And is the technology that we're discussing and playing with right now, would it move from the gaming environment, like the pivot that Second Life took into education and out of games? anyway, be an interesting conversation, because we know that one of the weaknesses of our e-learning strategies is the lack of real social connections.
Yep. Yeah, and that's something that a lot of people don't understand. I mean, anyone that's gotten into multiplayer gaming will understand how social playing video games can actually be. And that's great. You can play single player and be totally left alone, isolated, and that's good. But at the same time, it's good to have the option to be with other people. And especially in VR, like that comes through a lot more obvious. I mean, there's a game called Onward, and it's a VR military game. Closest thing I'd say, it's almost like an old school Ghost Recon, kind of more tactical, less Call of Duty, more like realistic. And just getting in firefights in virtual reality, hiding behind a wall, popping up, shooting, yelling at your friend, taking your microphone off your shoulder and talking and asking for ammo, seeing your buddy run over while he's getting shot. It's just like, even though it's not real, you kind of let yourself lose yourself in it for the sake of entertainment. And when you do that with other people, you can have some really cool experiences, because when you come out of a good VR experience, it's almost like you traveled, you just got back, right? Yeah. And your memory of what you did in VR is like your memory of a dream or in real life. It's not like, oh, I looked at a screen and I saw this flat image of something happening. It's more of like, oh, when I was there doing this happened, and your brain accepts it for that. And there's a couple studies. There's a University of Maryland had a study that's showing how much better people will remember things when they experience in VR in education versus not video conferencing.
Yeah.
So Chance, I just wanted to, so in terms of the slope of enlightenment, where are you hoping, in terms of Rumi's business, that the enlightenment will come first? Are you looking at it in the education sector, or are you looking at it more in the, I would say, corporate sector for the collaboration?
Yeah, for us, it's been, we tried to target specifically education, but it didn't really work out that way, because we realized that, well, companies need all the same features that schools need. Not all the same, but for the most part, the basic features that companies need are the features that schools need. And we realized that most companies were replacing their, training, with VR. So they basically want to teach just like a school does, except they're teaching work-related things. So it's been probably, I don't know, 50-50 more or less on companies versus universities.
Oh, is that right? Eh? And it is higher ed, correct?
I mean, it's anyone else use it. I mean, higher education has more access to VR headsets than, say, elementary schools, but it's not targeted towards any particular grade or anything.
Right. What are the biggest barriers to entry, Chance?
Hardware. You can use Rumii on a desktop Mac or PC without VR hardware. Probably any made in the last 6 years or so. But really, it's the price of headsets, which is good, because they're finally coming down. I mean, we have an all-in-one device now that's $400, but the Oculus Go, which is it's VR, but it has some big limitations, is down to $150. But for a lot of use cases, like sitting in a chair, and being in a class, the Go is actually pretty good. And $150 sounds expensive, but really, what's a college textbook cost, Chad? You work at a college.
Yeah. Well, it's
like
a lot.
$100 new?
A lot. What I was thinking of, since you mentioned textbooks, it's like, why can't like a school bookstore have like a, rent out an Oculus for a certain class that's going to be in VR. The student can take that home like they would a textbook. They're in this VR class, and if they fall in love with it, then they can purchase it after the class is over, or they can sell it back to the bookstore.
Right.
Yeah, and I can guarantee it's cheaper than having a physical building too, even if you bought everything.
A lot.
Headsets,
Yeah.
Exactly. So Brian just said, and I interrupted him, he just said that in higher ed, they're certainly looking at moving beyond Zoom, but there's also resistance. And what's the resistance, Brian?
The resistance comes from a number of angles, and you've already touched on a few. One of them is the sheer cost. Google Cardboard became very popular in K through 12 because it's cheap as heck, but the headsets are still very, very expensive. I mean, you're talking, multiple hundreds of dollars. That's an issue, especially for equity, especially now with the economy being clobbered. So that's one. A second is the just lack of familiarity. The overwhelming majority of academics I've talked to have never put a VR helmet of any kind, even a Google Cardboard, on their head. A third is the lack of educational content. Most of them are thinking about this in terms of video content, and It's hard to find them, and it's also much, much harder to actually create VR content. I mean, basically, have to spend a semester working in Unity to produce something. On top of that, there's suspicion about some of the business models. Facebook being such a prominent player really irks people.
Yeah.
Microsoft being a prominent player irks Apple fans and older people. And on top of this, I think there's the sense that VR is creepy or impersonal. I know. I'm just reporting what I'm hearing from people, not myself, that it is asocial. The social aspects are still very, very thinly on the ground.
I think from the outsider's perspective, it looks isolating, right? 'Cause you see someone, kind of like when Bluetooth started becoming popular and you see people talking to themselves on the street, you seem kind of like, what's wrong with these people? But Stephen?
I mean, you're strapping a computer to your head.
Yeah.
I mean, that's, and we know, unfortunately, that people have a distrust of people with anything blocking their vision, which is why Hollywood loves to have bad characters have glasses or sunglasses.
Interesting, yeah.
Oh, I never thought of that. Stephen?
I
Stephen?
also say, right now we're kind of torn. On the one hand, we want more and more social interaction, so we're shifting more and more towards Zoom because of the pandemic. On the other hand, there's also this pretty deep sense of skepticism about technology in general, a big longing for the face-to-face classroom. And if you show up and say, okay, I've got this thing, it's expensive, it's still kind of buggy, we don't have a lot of educational content for it, you might get motion sick using it, it's hard to make the case for it. So I think you've got a long way to go.
Yeah. Stephen, you had a question?
Yeah, I was just going to say my favorite phrase right now is "New World, Same Humans," and I just want to bring up the topic of corporate culture. And so, in Zoom and all the others, they have systems that support negative cultural behaviors. So things like sending a nasty private message about someone who's speaking privately to your friend in the Zoom session or whatever tool you're using, and all those other ways of just being a negative Nelly. And so my little terrarium is listening to my son talk about his Zoom and various WebEx sessions at McGill University. And he needs to usually keep everyone muted for what he calls his rants, but it's really a lecture. And he can record them and then have the conversation. But my wife does it in grade 5, and grade 5 boys have impulse disorders, and that's still, or just have it as a developmental stage. So the whole ramifications of Zoom bombing or inappropriate wallpapers behind you and all the other stuff. So there are human cultures that, in a negative way, you can use the technology to lock down certain behaviors, but it gets rid of all the other ways that people interact and learn and adapt. So things like I use humor when I'm lecturing, and not getting a laugh response because everybody's muted just won't work for me.
Yeah, that's something that's actually tough, I think, in VR also. Like I think once we reach a point where you can do a comedy show in VR and the comic feels like they're doing a comedy show, they get the same response.
Yeah.
That's going to be a point where they've actually really hit the head on the nail socially with VR, because it's, that's the one downside I guess I could say from when I do my talks in VR versus in person, or at least the one obvious one, is that I can't necessarily tell instantly when someone's enjoying what I'm saying, right? And these things will become more obvious as we collect more data. For instance, newer headsets, some of them have eye tracking, so you know where people's eyes are going, right? And eventually we'll get information for what the feet are doing, down to not just the hands, but maybe the elbows, right? And so you'll start getting a more accurate body language and be able to send more human characteristics over the internet, apply it to the avatar, so that you can see, oh, this person's laughing or this person's happy, So
it is a new language. And what they always say about new languages, that you are approaching fluency when you dream in that language or when you can tell a joke in that language.
Yeah.
And we're not at that stage in any of these technologies right now.
Yeah.
Right. So I hate to interrupt, but people are telling me that they need to be going to the next meeting. And so I just, Chad and Chance, if there were other points, that we need to cover, you'd
I
like
think
to
that's,
cover?
let me see if there's anything else in the presentation. I think that's it, right? Seems to
Yeah.
be.
And yeah, you guys can find me on LinkedIn. Just type in my name, and Twitter, which I put in the chat, Chance Glasgow on Twitter. You
I
can
just
follow.
have one final question for you, Chance, and Chad too.
Sure.
So because this is, I mean, I'm really interested in this for collaboration, projects, etc., but also learning. How do you use it for group work, Chance and Chad? How do you use it for decision making with your teams that you're working with?
We just use it as a company, just for all the instances you use video conferencing, we just do Rumii instead.
Wow.
Now there's a few instances we'll do like a Zoom, but most of the time, like 80-90% of the time, we just use Rumii. Just because we get used to it. It's also like by using it, we're testing it. We don't have to have like a separate testing. We use it. If we use it every day, we're gonna constantly be getting our own feedback. So.
Okay, great.
Yeah, it's.
Chad, are you using it this term for teaching?
I've done a little bit. Like I'm actually teaching a class next week, more like generically on extended realities, but I'm gonna be using Rumii on that. And then there's a Synapse conference.
Yes.
You're familiar with that, I think.
Saw that. Yeah.
They're next. I don't know when it is. It's in June sometime. They're gonna do a couple panels on VR, but we're gonna be in VR discussing that. So that's kind of a cool way to, we're talking about VR right now, but we're actually on these two-dimensional screens, and it would be really cool if we were actually doing this discussion inside Rumii. I do want to ask one last question. I know everyone's got to go, but I'm wondering if, and this is a question for you, Chance, but do you see like the merging of the AR and VR worlds? Like with my Quest, I can walk through that pass-through, and I'm like, oh, there it is, and Apple Glass is on its way in another year or so. So I always have this vision of being in VR, traveling through Google Earth, hanging out and going to Japan and being like, oh, there's Japan. And then going to Street View. And now I'm on Street View and I toggle over to the AR mode. And now I'm actually sort of hanging out in Japan.
Yeah. I think that eventually, they're going to be the same thing because they're almost the same technology. The difference is you're either rendering 100% of something digital of what you're seeing, or less than 100%. If it's less than 100%, it becomes AR.
Right.
99% would be AR, right? So I think at first we'll see them as separate devices, but as the technology gets better, they'll just have it be one. Because really, most VR headsets now are also AR devices because they have cameras.
Yeah.
As you put an AR camera on a VR headset, it can be an AR device. So, but Apple, they have they're probably the AR glasses that are supposed to be a real thing. They'll definitely push forward. No, I don't know anyone. If I did, I wouldn't be able to talk about it.
Yeah.
I'm just reading everything you guys have access to online. But yeah, once they launch anything AR or VR, that's really going to be a big push because a lot of people don't take things seriously until Apple does it. It's
That's
unfortunate.
true. That's true.
But they're obviously the marketing beasts. So
yeah. Apparently the Apple Glass was just leaked recently, I think. But it's still going to be a year and a half, 2 years, I think, right? So,
I have met with people from their VR department. I can say that. And honestly, there's nothing that I know that I can't say. Basically, I met with them. So obviously, if they've got a VR department at Apple and they have, met with them 3 years ago, probably.
Yeah.
They've been serious about this for a while.
Okay, great.
And that's no secret. Like, call me.
Follow you.
Oh, follow me. Yeah.
I follow you on Twitter, but are you writing?
Oh, so I've got a website that's going to go up soon. There hasn't been an official announcement yet, but if you guys have heard of the Atlantic Council in Washington, D.C.,
yes,
they have been around since 1961. They formed NATO, and they basically since then have been involved in global issues. They brought me on as a non-resident senior advisor or senior fellow, sorry,
Great.
to basically solve global issues using games. And so that's my, main consulting gig. Basically, I'm, got an indie game fund where we're taking basically, a bunch of money and investing in games that have certain messaging behind them, and also doing a mobile game and some streaming events. So it should be exciting. But I don't want to take us too much time because I know it's like 7 after. It's like a whole nother talk right there.
Well, thank you very much.
Congrats on that gig, by the way. That's awesome.
Thanks. Yeah,
Yeah.
I feel like way more official than I should be. I can't.
No, that's incredible.
I'm going to be on an Alex Jones video in 3 years.
Thank you so much, everybody who stayed. I know you stayed because you're very interested. And this is recorded. I'm going to be putting it up. Chance, you can do what you like with it. And thank you so much, Chance and Chad.
Sure.
Thanks, guys.
Yep.
Okay.
Take care.
Have a great
Bye-bye.
day. Bye, everybody.
Take care.